everyone. Welcome to this exciting session on a topic that is very important for Africa, ending conflict and building peace. And to help us talk about this important topic, we have a very good panel, an excellent panel, and I'm going to call on them one by one so you can help me welcome them to the podium. I'm going to start with the person who actually commissioned this report, put together a high-level panel that was chaired by President Johnson Sirleaf and brought together a group of experts to think about this topic and really put some recommendations on the table. Please join me in welcoming President Donald Kaberuka to the podium. Welcome, Mr. President. I'll now like to introduce, thank you very much, our hostess, the minister who has been overseeing a lot of the issues that are happening here and who will be one of our panelists this afternoon. And I know many of you already know her, but let me introduce Honorable Minister Louise Mushikiwabo. Please join us at the podium. Welcome. I'd like now to introduce former President Thabo Mbeki, who is not a stranger to this topic and who has worked on many, many issues, including as a special envoy for South Sudan. Welcome. And last but not least, I'd like to invite His Excellency President Olusegun Obasanjo, who has also been traveling tirelessly in the last number of years to work on these topics of peace and security. Thank you, Excellency. So to start us off, President Kaberuka, this is a topic that is dear to your heart, and you've put a lot of effort into this. Could I invite you to give us a few remarks to welcome us on this topic, but also to highlight the key points that you think we should be focusing on this afternoon?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me begin by thanking you for attending the annual general meeting of the bank and for coming to Rwanda. I know you have so many things to do, but we're very glad to see you here. Because as I was saying a while ago in another panel, we look at the meetings of the African Development Bank not simply as a place to do statutory matters concerning the bank, but we believe the convening power of the bank to enable discussion of a broader set of issues is equally important to what we do. So I want to begin by thanking the leaders who are here. President Thabo Mbeki, President Olusegun Obasanjo, and my good friend Louise. These are people who have almost gave up their careers to get peace and stability back on the continent of Africa. I don't know how many times I met Obasanjo on the plane. I asked, where are you going? He always going somewhere where there's trouble. As for Thabo, I think now he's about to get another Sudanese passport because he's not letting it go until he has found a solution. And of course, he's done many other crises in the past. I want to thank members of the high-level panel who are here. President Ellen Sirleaf is not here, but we have an excellent panel of people here who will introduce, who are the ones who did this work. Now, here's the background. When the World Bank was founded, it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And the reconstruction had a meaning. Because Europe was devastated by conflicts, and the bank was given a mission to do reconstruction and development. When the African Development Bank was founded, the R was not in the mission. It was a bank for development. The mission given to us was socio-economic development and particularly economic integration. But it became clear as the years went by that we had to find a way of getting the ARA into the mission of the African Development Bank. So a timid effort was done in the early 2000s because some people thought this was not our mandate. However, in the year 2003, the bank put in place a mechanism to help these countries on issues to do with debt. In 2007, I was then 2 years at the bank. I looked at all these conflicts on the continent and concluded that we needed to have a dedicated facility for those countries. And I want to thank the donors to the African Development Fund, where they gave us then a dedicated window of $700 million for those countries. And we were meant to do three things: to help them clear debt and engage with the international community, build destroyed capacity, and thirdly, kickstart the economies. These things worked very well. But here is a problem, and why I decided to put in place a panel. The first beneficiary of this window in 2007 was the Central African Republic. The president of the country came to visit me, and he said, please help us. And we decided to put this facility at their disposal. I myself traveled to Bangui. I opened an office. We helped the country clear the arrears, but you know where we are today, back to square one. We helped other countries all along, Burundi, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and many more. So by about 3 years ago, I was myself beginning to ask myself questions. Is that something we're not doing right? Is that something we don't understand? And so I asked President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was a beneficiary of this facility, who is extremely knowledgeable over these issues, who is a political leader, could you please get a team together to help us, advise us, the bank, how we can put the ARA into this work and also do it right? So the panel was put in place, and they have done an excellent work, which I'll be telling you. They have given us conclusions, which we have accepted. And on that basis, I asked the donors to the African Development Fund to increase the size of this facility, which now states is around $1 billion. But having money is one thing, and deciding what to do is something else. I was telling President Thabo and President Obasanjo at the last AU summit, you have heard me say this before, that on the day fighting started in Juba, the same day fighting started in Juba, that morning, the board of directors had approved $25 million. $25 million to provide electricity for the city of Juba. By 2 o'clock, they started fighting. And of course, the program is now on hold. So clearly, there's something we didn't understand. There's something we're not doing right. But now the panel has given us a way forward, and I hope that this afternoon we can learn a bit more. So our role is to support regional institutions like the AU, regional organizations, in what they do to bring peace. But once the guns have gone silent, we want to be sure that we can now back this up with the long-term plans. One more thing they have said to me, and I want to stop after this, was that we had defined countries in conflicts as a group of countries, 1, 2, 3, 4. We even had a number. But then we found that actually this was not the right thing to do. What they said to me was, each of our countries has a potential to explode. And being the head of the African Development Bank, which was based in Abidjan, and I abandoned our headquarters for 10 years, after a sudden explosion in that country, I understood the message. So clearly, one of the things they are saying is, you don't have a group of countries who have problems and others who are safe. You have elements of potential problem in each one country, and those two should be addressed by the facility which we now have in place of $1 billion. So that is the background. That is how the panel was created. And I look forward for your further advice.
Right. Thank you very much for that opening, and I think you really put on the table three important things that I hope the panel could expand on. Bringing the R into the African Development Bank, conflict as not a state of countries, but as a condition that can happen or not, but also the important aspects of having a facility that countries can come to. So to dig deeper into these issues, we have with us members of this expert panel, and one of their representatives, Mr. Greg Mills, will be joining us to explain how did you do your work, what were your main findings, and what advice do you have for the bank, but also for the participants at this meeting. So, Greg, if I could invite you to the podium to share with us the outcome of your report.
Our host, President Kaberuka, also the panel's temporary boss for 9 grueling months, President Obasanjo and Mbeki, our host in Rwanda, Minister Louis Mushikwabo, our moderator, Franny, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols, I hope, observed. I'm going to give you, as the moderator has asked, a few words on escaping the fragility trap and building resilience in Africa, some of the findings of the work of this panel. But I really want to focus on 3 issues. The first is to talk a little bit about the process, secondly, a little bit about the background, and thirdly, as the moderator has requested, something about digging into these findings. This, firstly, in terms of the process, this was a diverse panel of 7 specialists who convened from May last year under the chairmanship of President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. The other panelists are Rakia Omar, Gilbert Wambo, Barbara Stocking, Callisto Madavo, Sarah Cliff, and a minister from my own country, Geraldine Fraser Moleketi, now with the African Development Bank. The meetings kicked off in Liberia last September after a considerable amount of fieldwork had been done and a number of specialist papers commissioned, and there were numerous consultations in Brussels, Washington, many trips to Tunis, and consultations in Tunis, and so on. The report was ready at the beginning of this year and was presented to the AU Summit on the 30th of January this year. And since I know that all of you have read the report, let me offer a few words on the background. We know that about 1.5 billion people, ladies and gentlemen, live in conflict-affected and fragile states. Of the 26 fragile states so classified worldwide, and I'll come back to the point that President Kaberuka made a moment ago about these classifications, some 20 are commonly said to be in Africa. Many of these countries are resource-rich. By definition, they are also skills and governance poor and poverty-stricken, averaging around $500 per capita, even though 5 of the fastest-growing countries during the 2000s were in fact classified as part of this fragile grouping. They're clumped generally at the bottom of the UN's Human Development Index. Most are comparatively heavily dependent on aid, more than 3 times the global average, in fact, and 20 states of Africa receiving 1/3 of all aid flows worldwide. Most rely on a single commodity for the bulk of their export revenue, likely to be in mining, gas or oil, or a single agricultural crop. They have higher income inequality than the world average and congregate near the bottom of various indices, including Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index and the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings. Now, these statistics illustrate a paralyzing and often self-defeating dysfunctionality. In such environments where the state cannot often provide basic services and infrastructure, including schools and hospitals and roads, this exacerbates the fragility trap. Poor education implies fewer skills, and this means fewer opportunities, less growth, lower revenue, greater inequality, greater societal frictions, and more violence. Of course, absolutely no state welcomes the labeling as being failed or fractured or fragmented or fragile. These terms not only highlight the ignominy of not being able to run things properly and effectively, but also make much more difficult the prospect of attracting investment and of raising finance, the traditional avenues to prosperity. The failure label does very little to remedy this condition, by reinforcing a vicious cycle in carrying the stigma of a country without capacity and likely to gain funding without strict conditions or massive premiums. So, ladies and gentlemen, to be labelled as a fragile state is thus both a stamp and a guarantee for the perpetuation of a cycle of low growth, poverty, conflict, and hopelessness. But we felt that things certainly do not have to be this way. And with this background in mind, the panel came up with a number of key findings. The first of these, to reiterate what President Kaberuka has said, is that the labeling of states as fragile, for reasons I've already iterated, should be avoided. Fragility is a spectrum or a continuum in which many states contain elements of failure. Countries not fragile, not generally regarded as fragile, may within themselves, and one could think, and I'm sure that President Obasanjo will talk about this, one could think of the situation with Boko Haram at the moment, can have within their borders situations akin to failure. The second key finding was that the specific key drivers which need to be managed and harnessed in this process include the youth bulge and urbanization, and also the key aspect of gender marginalization. And I'm sure my fellow panel members will pick up on some of these themes in the Q&A. Other key policy recommendations include a need to realize the bank's comparative advantages. One recommendation is to look at fresh approaches to bank activity in fragile situations. President Kaberuka has already spoken about the need to expand the window or the facility when it comes to fragile states, but in particular there is a need to get the politics right. And while this is not strictly, the panel felt, within the bank's remit, the bank, it is also recognized, has unparalleled expertise to deploy in this regard, and needs to work in this area of politics and of criminal justice sector reform, for example, without which much of its good work could be jeopardized. Indeed, the bank has to be there in these environments at an early stage. If getting the politics right, ladies and gentlemen, is one key essential aspect, another is to assist in creating the conditions for employment. In this, expanding GDP and increasing income per capita is thus a first-order priority. Indeed, our work in the Fragile States panel identified ways in which donors can help fragile situations. One is through assisting with the establishment of competent and transparent local bureaucratic capability, the aim being to reduce corruption while developing key areas of capacity, including in tax collection, for example. Another is to subsidize key areas of infrastructure, such as electricity provision, with so-called pioneer investments by donors, subsidizing the provision of political risk also to private investors. And finally, we also identified a need to craft regional solutions, working with the RECs, working with the international financial institutions and other donors. We agreed in the panel, in the report, which I know that you will now read, just as the problems lie regionally, so do the solutions. Mr. President, Mr. Kaberuka, it's been an enormously challenging 9 months in producing this report, but I know that I speak on behalf of the entire panel in thanking you for your leadership, and President Johnson Sirleaf in her absence for the leadership specifically of the panel, and thanking you too for the excellent administrative backup which the panel received at all times in the conduct of its activities. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that report, Greg. And I know it was not easy for you to condense it in 7 minutes, but it gives us enough material to go back now to the panel and discuss. And I would like to start because I think one of the main findings also from the report had to do with the role of women, and we have a woman on our panel, and she's also our hostess in this country. And I'd like to start with you, Minister Louise. If you would comment on one aspect that came out very strongly in the report, which is getting economic growth after conflict and being able to sustain that over time. Rwanda has been cited as being one of the countries that has jumped very quickly into this high economic growth rates and has been able to sustain that. Could you share with us any experiences about how that was done and what other countries can learn from that?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Franny, as you can see, I'm a bit intimidated. I am in the company of impressive Africans who have been working on these issues for many years. I remember President Obasanjo telling me that he was a peacekeeper in the DRC in 1962.
60.
60.
That's before you were born.
And we were just in the lounge talking about South Sudan with President Mbeki and his insight. And so I'm privileged. I want to begin by welcoming Your Excellencies. Donald, welcome back home, and welcome all of you to this meeting of the African Development Bank. It's a great pleasure for us in Rwanda to host this meeting. You know, this topic of ending conflict and building peace is really a complicated business. It's at the same time what we must do, we the leaders. It's also what we must watch out for, and it's about getting our people involved. I am a strong believer in the fact that ending conflict, managing conflict, creating economic growth and sustaining economic growth has a lot to do with the people. There are many elements that are important, and I want to thank the panel also for the report. I browsed through the report, and I was scared by the fact that fragility could come from anywhere at any time. So, but I am a child of Rwanda's independence, and I was born and grew up in this country, and I've been following the course of this country since then. And ending conflict, sustaining peace, securing peace for a long time, in my view, has a lot to do with issues of bread and butter. It's about providing to our people. It's about engaging our people to the best of our ability. And it is also putting the responsibility to them alongside the leaders. What has been the experience of this country? And I must say, I think Rwanda has done well, but we have many, many more challenges remaining. And I'm really pleased with the course of this country, but I remain very cautious and vigilant about some of the things we have to really look out for, and especially sustainability. So the economic development is a prerequisite, I believe, for people, the average person, our villager, to take interest in the future and to take interest in the country, because that's part of having a stake in what is happening in the country. It's also, quite frankly, the most selfish part of us human beings. We want to be able to eat and sleep and send our kids to school and feel like we belong somewhere and we have a future. So in my view, it is a critical part of ending conflict, and it should involve everybody. You talked about women, but it's not just women. It's everybody in any situation of post-conflict, any situation where there is visible fragility, requires for all of us to be involved. But without a doubt, economic growth, providing the basics of daily life, is the beginning of preventing conflict.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister Luis, for that. And I'd like to now take your comments and ask President Mbeki two questions. First, Minister Luiz highlighted how important it is to have a stake in the future and to involve and include. And you have mentioned in an interview you did recently at Uongozi Institute that societies need to work from what they have inherited to go towards what they want to become. And you highlighted particularly the role of institutions, which came out very strongly in this report. Would you care to comment on that from your experience on the kind of institutions that are important for securing peace and stability, and also those that are important for inclusion going forward to become the society we would like to become?
Thanks. I hope, Madam Moderator, you don't mind if I answer questions that have not been asked.
Absolutely.
You don't mind?
That's part of why I would like to ask it in this way.
I mean, first of all, I think we should thank Donald here for the initiative to constitute this panel, to reflect on what indeed is a very important African challenge, this ending of conflicts and building of peace. I think the report is very good. I think the panel does indeed reflect on matters that are very relevant to this question. And I would imagine that there wouldn't be anyone among us who would really differ with the recommendations that the panel makes, which again, as the president of the ADB has just indicated, the bank has accepted. I don't believe that there would be a matter of controversy, except, of course, for President Obasanjo. He was always problematic. He is the one who might differ with this. But the rest of us won't. I hope you won't differ with that.
I will hand you over to Boko Haram.
Now, so the topic that we're given is this one, ending conflict, that the panel was dealing with, ending conflict and building peace in Africa. In his introduction just now, Greg Mills, quite correctly referred to the matter of politics. It's quite correct, and I think it's very fundamental to what we're discussing. This is the question that was not asked. For instance, in the report says, we have learned some important lessons about state building in the aftermath of major conflict and political instability. One is on the primacy of politics. It goes on to say, overcoming fragility is first and foremost about building or re-establishing the underlying political settlement on which the state is constructed. Without solid political foundations, attempts to build resilient institutions are unlikely to succeed. Without the right politics, any of these things which are very correctly proposed by the panel are not going to happen. So, the fact of the matter, we're talking about specifically to the topic ending conflict, start with that, ending conflict. I think to ask the question, how do conflicts begin? They don't begin because of a youth bulge. They don't begin because of urbanization or gender inequality or climate change. Conflict on our continent, I'm quite certain, constitutes a failure of leadership. And this is central. Donald here referred to decisions taken by the board of the ADB with regards to helping South Sudan to electrify Juba on the same day in which a conflict broke out. That conflict was eminently avoidable. And I'm quite certain President Obasanjo here is leading a commission to investigate the causes, etc., of that conflict. I'm quite sure, President, you will come to that conclusion, that it was eminently avoidable. The source of the conflict, I'm saying, was a failure of leadership. Failure of leadership, of the entire leadership of South Sudan. And I think if you look around the continent, with regard to all of these conflicts, you have to welcome the president, no?
Go ahead.
You welcome him now.
No, please.
President Kagame, on behalf of the ADB, on behalf of the ADB, I welcome you, President. We are glad you are here because we want to pick your brains on this topic that we are discussing. But you are most welcome. But I was saying that, you see, I think if you look around on the continent, look at the conflict now in the Central African Republic. Again, the source of that conflict in the Central African Republic is failure of leadership. Over an extended period of time, obviously, in the Central African Republic, I'm sure many of us here would recall that we even had an emperor, Bedel Bokassa, in the Central African Republic. There has been this consistent failure of leadership in the Central African Republic, which has got us into the problems in which we are. So I really do think that when we want to discuss this issue of ending conflict and building peace, we have to focus on the matter to which the report refers, of the politics. The politics which it says that this is a fundamental element without which, if you don't address it, you are then unable to address this matter of building peace on the continent. The proposals are correct in terms of what you got to do, in terms of building institutions, what Louise is talking about, of popular involvement, and let the people take ownership of all of this. But until we are able honestly to discuss this question, there's a panel tomorrow, very, very important panel, and I think President Kagame will be on that panel, President Obasanjo. I chickened out of it. And that panel is saying, what kind of leaders do we need? And I think it's an important discussion, and I hope the panelists will be able to discuss this matter quite honestly and frankly. Because if you look at the South Sudanese situation, I'm saying the reason for this conflict in South Sudan, eminently avoidable conflict, I'm saying it's a failure of leadership. Because here you had a leadership that in reality was self-centered, sought to serve its own interests, instead of the interests of these masses of the people that it claims to lead. And in the end, you have a jostle for power. They jostle for power, which then spills over into this war. And a war which then gets defined by the nature of the development or underdevelopment of South Sudanese society, which is why it then takes on these tribal forms. It was not as though the Nuer and the Dinka people decided to take up arms against each other. They never did. Their leaders decided and then mobilized these communities to fight against each other. So I'm saying, moderator, I think we need to discuss this matter quite frankly, to end conflict on the continent, to prevent conflict taking place. This question about the role of leadership on the continent becomes very important. I'm quite sure that to be the same thing in Nigeria. President Obasanjo indeed was suggested might talk about Boko Haram, and I'm quite certain that in the case of Boko Haram, what he tried to do to encourage leadership to intervene much earlier to deal with this thing, which didn't happen. If they had intervened, we would not be in the situation in which we are today. But it's a difficult question to discuss.
Let me interrupt you there to ask President Obasanjo to comment on what you just said. But also, if you could comment on the question that came very strongly in the report of the high-level panel on new and emerging types of conflict. And President Mbeki mentioned one of them, and the important role of leadership in that area. But if you would care to comment particularly, how do you manage, especially fragility as a state, how do you manage with these new and emerging conflicts, the risks, so that you don't end up in a constant state of conflict? From your experience traveling around Africa, as President Kaberuka has mentioned, perhaps you could comment on that point as well.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Don, I want to add my words of commendation to you for the foresight and the thoughtfulness to set up the panel. And I want to congratulate all members of the panel for a job well done. I want to just buttress the point made by President Thabo Mbeki. If we get the politics right, and if we get the governance right, I will add governance to it, because the two must go hand in hand. If we get both of them right, we will probably eliminate a substantial number of conflicts on our continent. But let me come to the point made by Don. You are giving $25 million or approving $25 million for electricity in Juba. But conflict just don't happen overnight. You can see them coming. Now, if you have been following the situation in South Sudan, with the cabinet, the entire cabinet removed, the vice president removed, the political bureau completely broken down, you will have seen that we were gradually moving towards a conflict. It's a question of when and how. So when President Thabo Mbeki said it was avoidable, I don't know. Because by the time that you have removed the cabinet, you have wiped out all the members of the party and the organization that saw themselves as those who really brought about the state of South Sudan, then you are already set for a conflict, and it's a question of time. It's something that will happen. But what can we do to avoid them? President Thabo Mbeki made reference to my own country. Maybe I should start from my own country. Let my charity begin at home. The only thing is that I will not want my charity to stop at home. I will extend it a little bit outside. And I will take two issues. When I became president in 1999, one of the issues that I had to deal with was the issue of militancy in the Niger Delta. 20 years earlier, I was military head of state. There wasn't anything like that. There was nothing like militants and militancy in Niger Delta. So I asked myself, how did this come about? What brought it about? When some of the leaders said, well, they encourage it, but it has now gone beyond their control. So I decided to call the boys in the creek area, about 40 of them. I said, come and meet me. Whatever crime you must have committed, forget about it. On this occasion, you will have amnesty for you to come. They came. And I said to them, look, I want to know why and how you are doing this. And the first thing I got was, oh, you killed my father, I killed your brother. My chief of staff, who was with me, tapped me and said, sir, you are sitting among murderers. I said, yes, I know. So I kept talking to them. And then my chief of staff turned to me again and said, hey, how do I explain to the world that my president is sitting and consulting with murderers? I said, tell the world that your president has a problem and is looking for solution. And if he has to sit with Satan to find solution, he will do so. Now, I needed a solution for a problem that was confronting us as a nation. After about 15 minutes, my chief of staff turned to me again and said, my conscience is worrying me. My conscience is worrying me. I said, you are not the only one with conscience. I have conscience too, but you haven't got responsibility for this problem. I have the responsibility. You can go if you want to go. He left me. I didn't count it against him. Then I continued with these boys, and the next thing they said to me, they said, look, when you mount your helicopter to look for us, as your helicopter is being fueled, we get information. If you are sending a ship, as your ship is getting prepared, we get information. So don't fool yourself. We get information and intelligence on everything you do. Now, that made me feel, well, how powerful am I or how weak am I? The next thing, I look at one of them, I say, look, you young man, why are you in this group called militants? He said, Mr. President, when you were military head of state, you established UPE, Universal Primary Education. That's why I was able to go to school. Because I went to primary school, I was able to go to secondary school. And then I went to university. After university, in the university, I decided, because I come from oil-producing areas, to study mining engineering. I made a 2-1 in mining engineering degree. I have qualified, graduated 3 years, I have no job. It explains. There's nothing to put it as graphically as that young man put it. All I said is that, yes, I understand. Something has to be done. And then we started doing something. We realized that, look, the main problem is there is job, there is poverty, we have to address. And most of these causes of conflict, it is either perceived or real injustice by those who see themselves as victims. And when they react, now you have to act before they react. And that is, to me, the most important thing. And let me come to Boko Haram. Because until I hand President Thabo Mbeki to Boko Haram, he won't know how to treat his brother. This thing called Boko Haram, we heard of them, we didn't know really what they were. So when they attacked the UN building in Abuja, I was worried. I called the Inspector General of Police. What is this? He said, they are a bunch of riffraffs. I called the National Security Advisor. What is this? He said, they are a bunch of riffraffs. I went to the president. Of course, the president will give what his security officers are giving. He called them a bunch of riffraffs. And I said, Mr. President, I'm a bit worried. I'm worried because young men and young women who must love life, if they put a band or a belt of gunpowder around their waist and hold detonator in hand and blow themselves up, there must be a reason. Are they mad? Is it fundamentalism of whatever nature? What exactly is it? Is it drug? And then I asked the president, I said, look, can I go on fact-finding? And he said, yes, I trust your judgment, go. In fact, if you want plane, I will provide a plane. I said, no, keep your plane, because once I take government plane, I become identified as government agent. So I went, to cut the story short. And they gathered themselves together, not Boko Haram. Later on, I actually realized that they said there were Boko Haram among them. But I was dealing with their lawyer through proxy. And what did I want to find out? Is there an organization? Yes, there was an organization. That organization, has it got an aim? Yes, their aim is Sharia. Sharia is no problem in our own country because it's part of our constitution. So it should not be a problem. Do they have grievances? Yes, they have grievances. Their leader was taken by military and handed over to police. He was killed in cold blood. The father-in-law was killed in cold blood. The number 2 man was killed in cold blood. And they then went to court to get compensation. They got compensation, and the compensation was not paid. Then they said, look, if we cannot get protected by the political leadership, coming again to governance and politics, and we cannot get protected by the law, legally, then we will take law into our hands. By the time I finished, I asked, are there leaders? They say, yes. The lawyer said, if you want to see their leaders, give me 3 hours. I gather them together, but not in Nigeria. Can they be talked to? He said, yes. But they don't want to talk in Africa. I said, this is an African problem. Let us talk about it in Africa. I suggested 2 countries, and they agreed. I reported faithfully to the state governor, who I say, look, from what I have heard, what I have seen, you can contain this menace within your state. And he said, yes, I will do all that you ask me to do and more. But when I start doing it, Abuja will say I become a member of Boko Haram. I said, all right, let's see what we can do. I went to report to the higher authority. Nothing happened. I told them to cease fire for 21 days, to wait for government for reaction. They ceased fire for 21 days. I went out of the country. I came back 20 days later, and they asked me, what has happened? I said, I told you that I am not in executive position. I can only report. I have reported, and if nothing has happened, nothing has happened. And they said to me, they will hear of us. 24 hours later, they started, and they haven't stopped since then. Now, you can see politics, governance, leadership. And most of these conflicts, they are like wounds, sore. If you do not attend to them in time, they fester and they become gangrous.
Let me follow up on that question, President Obasanjo. And first of all, turn to President Kagame. You've been listening keenly to what has been said from the panel. Would you care to comment on any of the issues that have been brought on the table before we go back to dig a little bit deeper? But you've been listening very carefully on these questions that have been raised here. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Why don't you sit down, sir?
I've been sitting down for a long time. I want to rest from that. But let me say, I followed what was being discussed for the short time I've been here. And I think there are good points being made about conflicts, the causes, and possible way forward in resolving them. But of course, what is very common is there will be old conflicts and old causes of the conflicts. There will also be new kinds of conflicts, as has been said, and possibly new causes as well. But what has been mentioned by the panelists that is important, the constant should be the kind of politics, the kind of leadership, the governance in place so that these old or emerging causes or conflicts can be resolved. This is key. And another way to look at it also and raise a question which we must answer is, for so long, we've discussed conflicts, causes of conflicts, and actually have quite a good idea as to what is needed for such a conflict to be resolved. Now, the question is, if we have analyzed conflicts and the causes, if we really have a good idea what all this constitutes, then what? So it comes, therefore, to the point that the leaders, therefore, should be there to deal with these problems. And here I'm not even proposing that there is one leader who can resolve conflicts alone, or that there is even a silver bullet for these conflicts. Therefore, it's the management of all these processes and what we have identified to be the root causes. But of course, when it comes to Africa, I'm sure many people in this audience will have made the same observations. I think we must take responsibility and accept our failures in dealing with these matters. For example, relating to what President Obasanjo has just said, on the case of Boko Haram, or you can use that for many other cases. For me, when I'm watching on television, and I find our leaders who should have been working together all along to address these problems that commonly affect their countries, wait until they are invited to go to Europe to sit there and just, it's like they are made to sit down and address their problems. Why does anybody wait for that? What image does it even give about us, about Africa? In fact, the image it gives is that we are not there to even address these problems. We are there for a photo opportunity. We are happy to sit there in Paris with the president of France and address and just talk about addressing problems. It doesn't make sense that our leaders cannot get themselves together to address problems affecting our people. It doesn't make sense. Of course, I'm saying this painfully on the other hand that, well, I look forward for the time when I can be like the two former presidents. I think they are more free to say things than I do. Being where they are and me being where I am. So I tend to remain with some reservations about what I have to say because, but I think there is that serious problem. African leaders, we don't need to be invited anywhere to go and address our problems without first inviting ourselves to come together to tell each other the actual truth that we must tell each other about our serious problems. So, I mean, again, look at the problem of South Sudan, indeed. The first problem was about this country and the people there wanting to be independent. They got independence. Now that turned into a problem. How? So you have one war being fought, waged to be independent, then you have to fight another when you have achieved independence. Just fighting among themselves. Why? So some of these underlying root causes should and could have been addressed by the leaders there. Whatever happened, whoever was wrong, that's not the issue. It is still the responsibility of leaders. If they can't resolve the matters themselves, why not? Why not call upon neighbors to say, come and help? We have a problem here. Maybe there is a problem between the president and the vice president. And if they can't resolve it, and each one thinks he's the one who is right and the other is wrong, and they are going to divide the army and government and everybody else to go on either side and start fighting, well, I think in between the time that starts and when it actually happens, something can be done. But it has to be leaders to work towards that and avoid the catastrophe that, like we are seeing or have seen or that has already happened in South Sudan. But of course, the unfortunate part is that the most majority who suffer are the innocent people who have nothing to do with it. Women, children, and even many men are innocent in that situation. So this is, I'm not giving answers, probably I'm raising more questions than, or adding to others that have been raised. So for the time being, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Kagame. You mentioned that you are still in politics, so you can't speak freely, but sitting next to you is President Mohai, who is not currently a president. And if I could ask you to comment on what you've been hearing from the panel, but also from what was just said by President Kagame, and of course, from your role on CODA, which is a Committee on Development Effectiveness in Africa, and the work you've been doing there.
Well, I don't have anything to add to what my eminent colleagues have already said, that when problems arise, they have to be attended in time. I think that the lesson that the President Obasanjo has just taught us. And that one of the things that both of them have said, and the President here, is to find out what the actual cause is of the grievances. And that once you have done that, you then try to attend. And that in any case, all conflicts in the world, even wars themselves, can only be ended when there is some negotiation between the parties to the conflict. And that therefore one must be willing to sit down, even when some of the worst things have happened, to sit down and talk, try to talk sense into each other in order to bring conflict. And then try to ascertain or find out what it takes for the other people to come to the table. But all in all, I get the message about the importance of leadership, that the role of leaders is to take initiatives to try to deal with problems as they arise, and that their own egos must be subordinated to the importance of nation building or peacemaking. And that some of our problems, as the President has mentioned, really arise from our self-interest and greed. I think some of the things, when we said that we must talk about some of the problems, President Mbeki, my understanding of those problems, that some of them is greed, where people come to power and are obsessed with self-importance. And we have to acknowledge it to ourselves that we are part of the problem. And we should stop being part of the problem and begin to be part of the solution. I think that's all I can say. The overriding importance and responsibility of leadership. Leadership which realizes that when we say, in my language, we say a chief is a chief by virtue of the people. The South Africans have translated it and said, you are because I am because you are. Let me stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks. We have time for 2 questions or comments, and really they have to be very short because we are running out of time. And so please make a comment, and I'll start over here and then go on the other side. Yes, please, the microphone to the gentleman over here, next to the one with the yellow badge. Right here. Professor, right here. And I have time for one more, so if there's anyone who wants to ask, this is your chance to raise your hand so I can see you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. I just wanted to share with the audience 2-3 lessons we can take as from Rwanda, but also looking at globally at the conflicts on the continent. Number one, I think in fragile states, we need to prioritize security. Prioritizing security, but also even in terms of institutional building and state building. And that will mean that we look at public safety as a public good, and therefore, if we need to have security, the institutions providing that public good will need to have standards, to have a clear mindset, to have an understanding of a people-centered governance, and to have a proper mechanism of their own internal governance. Then you can set that negative peace, can have it achieved. And Rwanda, if I can use Rwanda as an example as of today, the security institutions are the most trusted by the citizens in the whole nation. And yet, traditionally we know that in fragile countries and post-conflict societies, security institutions inspire fear. And here we go, they are inspiring confidence. Number two, I think all the fragile countries, what they share is the mismanagement of diversity. Mismanaging diversity goes along with poor leadership and lack of fixing governance systems. So it is imperative that we don't allow diversity to manage us, but we manage diversity towards unity. The third element I wanted to share is how do we involve the citizen? How do we make our governance people-centered? How do we make people monitoring what we are doing as leaders? How do we track progress? How do we fix challenges? How do we datify governance and successes in governance so that we can learn from ourselves? And lastly, in one world, I think in fixing governance, in having right governance, it is imperative that African states, they think about a political governance system, democratic system that is conducive to their own context, is not a copy-paste from the West, but we need to think about a political system that is going to be conducive for our societies, that is going to take away confrontation of politics, that is going to embrace power sharing, that is going to embrace consensus building. In those very few cases, I think Rwanda has tried and attempted to achieve that power sharing system, consensus building, so that we can properly manage our diversity and move towards unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to your question, I'd like to ask one of the high-level panel members, Rakia, if you could comment on this question of security and just share some of the highlights from the report, since this is one of the issues that has come up also amongst our panelists.
Thank you very much. I think the report of the panel highlighted as...
Speak more directly into the mic.
Okay, yes.
Microphone.
It's okay, yeah. The report, as you mentioned, highlighted and gave prominence to the issue of getting the politics right. And I think that's really one of the innovative approaches of our report. But equally, we emphasize the importance of security, particularly in post-conflict situations and in fragile states. And in this respect, we understand that security sector reform and building institutions of security, criminal justice, the justice sector, law and order, an effective and efficient police service. We understand that these institutions and issues are not within the classic remit of the bank. At the same time, we emphasize the fact that unless citizens have feel a sense of security, they are not going to feel a sense of belonging. They are not going to feel that the conflict is over. They are not going to have confidence and faith in these critical institutions of the state. And therefore, people will always continue to have a sense of loyalty to other factors, other institutions that they feel can protect them. Therefore, we emphasize the importance of the bank building partnerships with other institutions, be it other international organizations, UN agencies, that work directly on building strong security sector institutions. Again, I think it's very important for the audience to understand and realize the extent to which we also emphasize the importance of building institutions. A lot has been said here about the importance of governance, about the importance of getting politics right. But part of that, and I think it also ties in with the discussion about leadership, is I think we have a crisis of leadership in Africa precisely because we are not investing in building institutions. Politics is always defined in terms of individuals. The president who is in power, the opposition leader who is aspiring to power. But there is very little investment in building institutions that are entirely independent of the ego or the aspirations or the political agenda of those particular individuals. So I think it would be misleading to isolate leadership from governance, from institution building, from a sense of security. I think they are interlinked, and I think that's what our panel debated a great deal, and what we also emphasized in our report, that these issues are interlinked. You can't have a fair and effective system of governance if you don't have justice. You can't have justice if you don't have strong institutions. You can't have strong institutions if you have poor leadership. So they are interlinked, and I think it is very important to address them from this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm told by Dr. Kaberuka that we have a little bit more time, so I can get a few more questions, but you've been very patient, so let me hear from you, and then we have a question up here in the front. So please go ahead.
Merci, madame. Je pense que pour peut-être faire le gender balance, il y a une femme à côté de moi qui veut intervenir après. Ça permettra de s'assurer de la présence et de la contribution des femmes. Madame je voudrais saluer les hautes autorités. Je suis autant intimidé que mon homologue du Rwanda par la présence dans ce panel des présidents Obasanjo et Thabo Mbeki. Je suis le ministre d'État Touakes Mabri de la Côte d'Ivoire. Ces deux personnalités sont intervenues dans la situation de la Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais également dire toute ma très haute considération au président du Rwanda qui nous accueille. Je voudrais ici saluer le président Kaberuka et cette initiative importante. J'ai eu la chance d'être invité donc à Monrovia il y a quelques mois pour participer aux travaux du panel en tant que pays fragile, et c'est le cas donc de la Côte d'Ivoire, comme vous le savez. Le président Kaberuka, dans ses propos préliminaires, a dit pourquoi tous ces investissements ne donnent pas les retours qu'il faut. Il a donc posé cette interrogation qui est pertinente, et je voudrais dire que pour moi, et je rejoins le président Obasanjo, les raisons sont à la fois économiques et politiques. On ne saurait exclure, et chaque conflit est particulier. C'est vrai qu'il y a des traits communs, mais chaque conflit est particulier, et on ne peut pas donc dire qu'aujourd'hui, la question de la pauvreté, la question de l'emploi qu'il a évoqué ne trouve pas de la place en même temps que les questions de gouvernance dans nos pays. Il y a aussi la question de la gestion et donc la prévention des conflits, qui nous amène à d'autres analyses ici. La capacité propre de nos pays, ou même du continent, à agir en anticipant ou en intervenant lorsque les conflits se présentent. Nous sommes généralement obligés d'attendre les forces des Nations Unies avec des financements qui viennent de l'extérieur. Lorsque le panel a été reçu par le président Alassane Ouattara à Abidjan, il a insisté sur le fait que dans les conclusions du panel, on inscrive la nécessité d'avoir des forces régionales. Au niveau de l'espace CEDEAO, nous avons essayé, ce n'est pas l'Union africaine a les mêmes choses. Alors qu'est-ce que nous faisons? Et surtout, comment nous finançons ces forces? Je voudrais rappeler que nous arrivons de Mexico sur l'efficacité du développement, et les questions qui ont été discutées là-bas ont pris en compte la question de la sécurité régionale et la possibilité, donc, les ressources que notre continent a, qui sont quelquefois spoliées, que ces ressources puissent servir à renforcer notre capacité d'intervention. Et c'est en ce moment-là que nous aurons notre autonomie. Et dans cela, la place de l'intégration, la place des voisins est importante, et je voudrais ici insister là-dessus. Ceci dit, je voudrais dire que la BAD a raison d'ajouter le volet reconstruction, parce que le volet reconstruction prendra en compte nécessairement la question de la lutte contre la pauvreté, la question de l'équité dans la distribution donc, des fruits. Et le président de la BAD a l'exemple avec ce que nous connaissons à la frontière entre la Côte d'Ivoire et le Libéria. Vous savez que la situation s'est stabilisée en Côte d'Ivoire, mais pratiquement chaque 2 ou 3 mois, nous avons une attaque à partir de la frontière libérienne. Est-ce que nos pays, y compris nos voisins, ont la capacité eux-mêmes de protéger le pays qui est devenu fragile? Lorsque eux-mêmes sont fragiles et ont davantage de problèmes, peut-être que nous devons trouver la solution au plan régional et en renforçant les capacités. Je terminais, Madame, en disant que la Côte d'Ivoire est un cas spécifique qui, en sortant, a vu un chef de l'État qui a assuré un leadership, qui a dit « j'y vais tout de suite avec la paix, la sécurité, ensuite je renforce la réconciliation et la cohésion, puis je fais la relance économique ». Cela nous a conduit à un plan national de développement avec une croissance qui allait très vite en l'espace de 2 ans. Maintenant, nous essayons de voir qu'est-ce que nous faisons au cours des 5 prochaines années, notamment pour que la croissance devienne inclusive et prenne en compte la dimension économique des conflits, en même temps que d'assurer l'émergence. Et c'est pour cela qu'avec le système des Nations Unies, le PNUD, la BAD, nous sommes en train de réfléchir à l'organisation à Abidjan au mois de novembre prochain, peut-être combiné avec le cinquantenaire de la BAD, d'une conférence sur l'émergence avec un pays qui sort de conflit, qui peut mettre des mécanismes, qui peut être accompagné et devenir émergent en l'espace d'une décennie. Et nous pensons qu'à l'occasion, ce sera aussi bon pour que nous puissions renforcer cette discussion. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup pour ces commentaires. We'll take one more question and then we'll have to go to closing. So we have, because I had asked already Nkosana here, 2 last questions. Very briefly, please. First, Nkosana, and then yourself, sir.
Thank you, Franny. I think the observations of the panel and the panelists and President Kagame are all correct. My question is, though, that I would submit that with the best will in the world, with all the leaders believing in all of this, from time to time, there will be a failure and a conflict will erupt. I think it is just in terms of preparedness, we need to also ask the question, on those occasions when the conflict erupts, what are the remedies that the continent is prepared to put in place? In other words, it begins to ask the question of how we treat and interpret the issue of sovereignty. What are we prepared to do to stop conflicts on the occasions that, in spite of all of the understanding and agreements, something does happen because for some reason we just can't get the 2 sides to agree?
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Le président de BAD, je veux justement vous remercier pour ce que vous avez consulté. C'est très important pour dire que ce qui est important en Afrique, c'est des institutions qui sont vraiment fortes et pas les gens qui dirigent les institutions. Ce qui est important, c'est les institutions. Et je vous remercie pour mettre en place, comment dirais-je, que vous avez mis sur scène. Et ce que tous les anciens chefs d'État ont dit, c'est vraiment poignant. Et je ne peux pas parler trop parce que tout ce que je voulais ajouter ou demander a été vraiment affirmé par le panel. Merci.
Okay, merci. So let me turn back to our panel. You've been listening carefully to these questions. A number of issues have come on the table. Border security, natural resource management, managing tension and being prepared with remedies in case things go wrong in the future, the question of inequalities, but I'll also add the question of urbanization and the growth of cities, which is, according to the report, one of the potential areas for conflict and needing preparedness for us to be able to manage that. So let me start with you, Minister Louise, to comment on these questions, but if you could pay particular attention to the issue of growing cities. Every time I come to Kigali, I'm amazed at how the city has transformed. And many cities are not growing in a structured, organized way, and services are quite difficult in a number of areas. Could you comment on these issues, but also if you would put some comments on the question of cities as well and local governance?
Thank you, Franny. It's very interesting to get the views of people who have been in charge of countries and people in charge of countries. But there is a number of aspects that have come up, whether it's the quality of the leadership and the necessity to take responsibility. I believe looking at all these examples we have around us on the continent, examples of conflict, one thing that stands out from the contributions of the elder statesmen here and even from the audience is that, to me, there is a level of boldness and taking very, very difficult decisions that I think a number of people do not understand in terms of leadership. What do, we leaders on this continent, when we are faced with extraordinary problems that need solutions? So I think that's something we need to continue thinking about as we debate this ending conflict and sustaining peace on the continent. It's the step that we take that normally would not be taken. And if I can, with the caution I gave earlier about this country not being anybody's model, but a country that was faced with a very difficult circumstance. And in the end, Rwanda really is the sum total of its experience, good and bad. So as we reflect, and this is an issue that will continue to come up as we have seen and given the current conflicts, there is a combination of things, but for me what is standing out is to be ready to take extremely difficult decisions in terms of leadership. Cities, I think I will be excused since I don't really live in this city. But what has been very helpful for the city of Kigali, I think first is the vision of a city we wanted. What does this country want 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? And so planning was a very important aspect of what we do. And then very, very simple things such as ordinary cleaning that most of us in this city are getting used to, making sure that in our own communities around the city, we are coordinated in terms of how the city is planned and also through our community work, which is every last Saturday of the month. The element of planning is extremely critical. The rest is technical planning and, of course, people who are specialized in planning cities. But I think the evolution and the positive changes have to do with how we envision our cities, but also how we plan for our cities. The rest is, of course, compliance of the city dwellers, who are often not very easy to deal with, but that's also part of what the government has to do.
Right. Thank you for those remarks. President Obasanjo, your closing comments on the basis of the issues raised, but also some of the comments made from the floor.
Thank you very much. I believe that if I'm asked to say what really will be at the beginning and end of getting rid of conflicts in Africa, I would say leadership, leadership, and leadership. And and of course, that has come out even from the floor. And let me just give 2 or 3 examples. President Kagame talked about leadership, not just the national leadership, but also the regional and continental leadership. When Darfur started, and there was dilly-dallying as to getting troops in, Nigeria sent troops in. Rwanda, a small country with a small army, sent troops in. And that became the beginning. We haven't completely solved the problem, but those troops going in the time they went in has saved life and has made the international community to believe that Africa is really serious in trying to resolve its own problem by itself. We had a similar problem in Liberia, and we decided, not the Liberian authorities, but with the concurrence of the Liberian authorities, to set up a national conference in Accra. Those of us in West Africa and President Thabo Mbeki and President Chisano, they were with us. We convinced Charles Taylor he was legally and legitimately elected. Now, to help your country, you have to agree to make sacrifice. He agreed. It was President Thabo Mbeki and President Chisano who actually went to Liberia to bring him to Nigeria. And then when they brought him to Nigeria, they went away and left him with me. Now, but the point is this. If collectively we haven't done that, Liberia will not be what it is today. If Charles Taylor was pressed, he would have gone into the bush, and he will be very comfortable in the bush and make life unbearable, not only in Liberia, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Sierra Leone, and it will be a mess for the whole of West African sub-region. Now, so when somebody said, well, we have a bit of leadership deficit in Africa, maybe we need to look into that. And where the leaders is there, effective, you can see the change. And I will say, I don't want to embarrass President Kagame. This is one country that you can say the leadership is effective. And I will say, President Kagame, I will say those things that you are doing right, keep doing them right, and deepen and widen them. And maybe we will all come here to learn from you. Thank you very much.
President Mbeki, your closing remarks. You started off with this question of leadership, so would you care to comment on other issues that you have heard also from the floor?
Well, Madam Moderator, as I recall again what Greg Mills said when he was introducing the report, he did say that as the ADB couldn't very well spend a lot of time discussing this matter of politics because that's not within its remit. And that's correct. But yeah, I think it's a matter that needs to be discussed somewhere. I'm glad President Paul Kagame is here. So I think it's a task we should give to him of the current leadership on the continent. This issue has to be discussed somewhere honestly. So this is a very, very practical matter. I mean, as we're sitting here, I hear from people across the border from Rwanda, from Burundi, that were faced in Burundi with the possibility of a very big and explosive destruction.
The same with Burkina Faso.
With Burkina Faso, same. It's a very, very practical African matter about the killing of many Africans, about destruction of society, absence of development. With all of the efforts of the African Development Bank, we subtract by this instability. It's a very, very practical matter. And we have to answer this question very, very practically. What do we do? Paul Kagame says, look, we've analyzed this thing, causes and so on and so on, but why do they recur? Why is it that we're unable, with all of the studies that we've done, why have we been unable to stop this thing occurring? And they are very, very destructive, as all of us can see. I'm saying that there has, in truth, there has not been an honest discussion among the African leadership about itself. There hasn't been. So it's easy to brush away these matters and attribute instability. Sure, all of these things that are said about what causes fragility and so on, all of these things are correct. But why don't we address this one central matter? Strong institutions, yes. But who's going to create the strong institutions? They don't create themselves. There's something that comes before the institution. There's something that comes before the institution, and what comes before the institution is this leadership we're talking about. But I'm saying that I think this matter has not been discussed honestly among ourselves as Africans to say, look, the leadership in Kenya, the 2007 elections, what went wrong? What went wrong in Kenya with those leadership was leadership. It was a failure of leadership. And that leadership must take responsibility, surely, in Kenya for having allowed that thing to happen. It was not because the ordinary people there decided to take machetes and start chopping one another. But I'm saying the bank is not the place to discuss all of this. Somewhere else. And President Kagame will lead this discussion, an honest discussion. And indeed, when then we talk about peace building, the report that's been prepared by the panel becomes important. Because then indeed we must then say, here are these things like urbanization, like gender inequality, like poverty and so on, which become drivers in terms of the instability which makes societies unmanageable. But in the first instance, we've got to address what is in the title, ending conflict. And to do that, we have honestly to take responsibility as this leadership on our continent. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kaberuka, you've been listening. There are some things the bank can do. There are other things others have to do. But you launched this report at the African Union, which is one of the spaces where some of these things can do. But what do you take away from this conversation, and any other comments you wish to make from the start of your opening remarks?
Thank you so much. First of all, I think this has been a great opportunity. My colleagues from the bank and they are listening very carefully, including our board of directors. President Thabo, you're right. We are not the place where politics of security are discussed. And we shall not take off that. It's not ours. We don't know how to do it. Other people, other institutions, competent, must take up these issues. But we are Africa's development bank. The arrow for the construction must be put in there. And this is helping me to figure out how to do it. Just a small story for people here. Please forgive me if there are colleagues from Central African Republic. I speak with my understanding the sensitivities. When I went to the Central African Republic to open the office of the bank, they tell me I was the first president of the bank to go to Bangui because I really believed what they needed, now that they had an elected government, was resources and some support. Now, when I was there, I realized that the city of 1 million people still had a pumping station for water for 10,000 people, built before I was born. And look at how old I am. And so I decided to urge the bank to do a water project for Bangui. This project was underway. It was one of the things looted during the rebels' takeover of the city. So we have a problem in the sense that we try to be apolitical, but now we're getting the point where we need to understand the political context in which you operate so that you don't waste your money, which will be destroyed in a few years. If this project in Juba had taken on, it would probably have been destroyed. So we'll have to walk the tight line between understanding the political dynamics, what to do about it, how much money we shall commit. That's my first comment. Number two, I was going to tell you something else. I don't know if you know how the African Development Bank ended up in Cote d'Ivoire and the Asian Development Bank in Manila, Philippines. There are a lot of politics, but one of the reasons was that Cote d'Ivoire was then in the 60s deemed to be one of the most stable countries on the continent of Africa, and it was. And the Philippines was considered to be one of the most promising countries in Asia, and it was. But one of the challenges of my presidency of this bank was that we have had to operate with my staff for 10 years outside of our headquarters because the Ivory Coast, which was stable, became unstable for 10 years. Thank God the operational capacity of the bank was not affected, but it was a big issue for me and the staff of the bank. I don't know how they operate in Manila. They've had some challenges as well. The last point I want to share with you, we're under pressure now to reopen the office in Bangui in Juba. The answer I'm giving is we will go there as soon as security is back, precisely because of the reasons you mentioned, President Becky. You have got millions of Africans trapped in there. Number two, you have got effect on the neighbors. Number three, you have got the image of Africa going. Because if you look at television, they say, not conflict in Sudan, conflict in Africa. So we have to handle that. And then, of course, the destruction of capital, including projects that are funded. So for us, this report is extremely important in deciding what to do, where, and when, and we shall learn a lot from it. Finally, now that we have leaders who are here and who have given us their honest opinions, thank you very much for that. One thing you have to look at, I keep wondering, if there was no oil in Southern Sudan, whether this conflict would have been so violent. It's quite possible that you're talking about leaders, but where there is attempt at rent seeking from an easy source of rent like oil, then you have a problem. So I hope when you discuss these issues, where they should be discussed, this matter must be addressed. Oil belongs to the people, it does not belong to the leaders. I think that the people of Sudan, who have to reconcile their country, need every dollar from that oil. Now they have nothing. Oil production has declined significantly, and by the time they repair the facilities, who knows what the price will be. But their way, I want to thank you very much for these contributions. My colleagues and I have listened very carefully. I want to thank the leaders here, the panelists, and the participants. Thank you very much for your contribution.
These remarks bring us to the close, and I will close with just 3 important issues that I think are absolutely critical that have come on. First of all, come tomorrow to the session on leadership. You've heard it here. It's the #1 issue, leadership, 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 and tomorrow we'll go much deeper into that topic with a very important panel to cover it. Secondly, let's understand what's happening and let's be ready. Be prepared in the event things change. And I think this is absolutely important and critical. And there are institutions that can do that on the political space and institutions that can do that on the development space, but the collaboration is very, very critical. And the third thing, and this I leave really with a very important reminder to all of us. We can solve Africa's problems, and we have to do it first, without waiting for somebody else to come from outside and help. So we should help ourselves first. I think this is very important. It has come out strongly from the panel, because when you help yourself, then outside help becomes even more effective. But we have to get together and find the space to do that. So please join me in thanking our panelists. Thanking the members of this high-level panel who put together this incredible report that allowed us to do this here today. And our host, President Kagame, and the country of Rwanda that is hosting thousands of people coming here for the ADB annual meetings. And Dr. Kaberuka, for your leadership as well in bringing this topic to the forefront of the questions that the bank should be considering. Thank you very much, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now close the meeting. I know we have gone a little bit over time, but I can see I left many people out who had questions. Let me encourage you to phrase your questions, bring them. There are many other panels here. It's an exciting meeting. So look at the agenda for each of the topics that you have, whether it's cities, natural resources, leadership. Come with your questions to those panels and bring them there. They will all be entertained and responded to. Thank you so much for your attention this evening, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you.